Hello, my little earthlings. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking to you guys about reference sheets. All right, so what are reference sheets? So reference sheets are things that you use to reference when you are working on your comic or webcomic. So this can include things like characters or even locations. So if you have characters from an alien planet like mine, it's good to draw up those different alien species, as well as it's good to draw the different locations on your planet so you know what they look like. The funny thing is it's a little hypocritical of me, just because with my latest updates I really did just sort of kind of wing it. When I was drawing the shipyard on Daneb, I actually did not draw it out ahead of time, but it also is why I'm doing this video, because I felt like, I really need to work on doing reference sheets, and I can explain why I think they're important. So let's see, why are they important? So reference sheets are important because you don't want to run into issues where your character looks one way in one panel and looks different in the next. You want your character to have continuity, whether that's in their outfit or their hair or even just their face or their facial expressions. And a lot of that comes just from practice of drawing it and redrawing it over and over and over again. So it's also really useful to have these reference sheets for locations, because say like you take the time to do a really detailed picture of a location or even like a map or something like that, you'll already kind of have it ready in your brain when you get to that scene where you're going to be drawing it for the first time when you're doing your establishing shot. So it becomes less intimidating and it becomes less daunting. I know that for myself with my latest update for ET Girl. I did a flashback scene where Gus is being taken in by these Arrow officials to a shipyard. And not only was it the first time drawing the shipyard, it was my first time drawing some of those characters. So it would have been less scary and less daunting and less something that I kind of didn't look forward to if I had taken some time to draw the reference sheets for some of those things ahead of time. All right, so how do I make a reference sheet? So how you would make a reference sheet is pretty much up to you how you want to do it. It can have as much or as little information as you want. I would say the bare minimum of what you should have, so you don't have too little on there, is you should probably include your character's name, your character's height, perhaps their weight, their gender, or their orientation, and then also include something along the lines of maybe their hometown and show them in a few different outfits, something like that. So that can kind of be like a good starting place. You can go a lot deeper. You can go into like the family history of your character. You can make a little list of likes and dislikes for your character. And that's going to be something I'm going to save for a whole new video. All right, so the next thing is, how many reference sheets do you need to make? So this depends on the kind of comic you're doing. So if you are just doing something like a project for yourself and you have a lot of free time, then you can take as much time or as little time as you need on it. It depends on how skilled of an artist you are. So let's say like you're a newbie starting out and you want to know, well, how many reference sheets do I need of my character? I would probably recommend about 2, maybe 3. So the first one you'd want to have is just your character standing, just a front and back, maybe a few different outfits. The second character reference sheet you probably would want is one with facial expressions. So you can make sure that when it comes down to it and you're drawing your character making a new facial expression for the first time, that you can look back at one you've previously already mastered and you know how you want it to look. And then the third reference sheet that I would probably do is maybe a few poses that you feel your character would do often in the comic, whether like say like it's an action comic. Maybe drawing your character doing a few action moves will help you, because it's very difficult to do poses, I think more so than even facial expressions. So because you have to take something very basic like a pose and then you have to impose that on your character. And that comes into the ability to do foreshortening with limbs and things like that. And that comes down to your skill as an artist. So I would say do those 3 things at first if you're just starting out. And, you know, if you don't do one of these, it's not like set in stone. Like, don't beat yourself up. It's just, you can learn as you go if you really want to. It's not a big deal. These are just like loose guidelines, basically. Okay, so the problems that can arise from not using reference sheets and why it's so important, like why I stress the importance, is because of continuity errors. So continuity errors can be things like their outfit might change from one panel to the next, or the color of their clothing might change. And that's another thing too. Two really important notes I almost forgot to talk about here. One, you can do a reference sheet also for items. So if you're doing something like my comic, like a sci-fi comic, it might be good to do a reference sheet of all of the weird, whether that's devices or weapons. You might want to do a sheet for that. Yeah, if your comic is also in color, I would recommend making little blots of each color that is your primary color that you want to use consistently throughout the comic, and make sure those colors are on your reference sheet so you can literally just color select from your color sheet and get the same color every time when you go to fill in the color on your pages. Another thing is your character's overall look may shift. So yes, if you don't take the time to sit there and practice drawing your character, you might notice their look will shift. And sometimes that can be for the better. Like, the better you learn your character, they'll kind of shift looking more like how you wanted them to look. Maybe early on you couldn't quite get it right. I know I had this problem with Fergus early on. I actually took a long time on his design to try to get him to look the way I wanted him to look. Even then, I noticed that, you know, Gus didn't quite look the way I wanted him to look. I wanted his eyes a little bit smaller, and I wanted his jawline a little bit more broad, and I wanted his lips a little fuller, and all these other things. You know, I didn't want his head so tall, you know, so I have to constantly tweak and retweak and make sure I'm looking at my reference sheet for him, and even updating my reference sheet, because my first reference sheet of Gus is like 6 years old. I've noticed him growing into his self, and I'm drawing him more consistently, mainly just through doing the pages every week. So that's practice in and of itself. And yeah, the last part, the reason why it's another problem that can arise from not having reference sheets, is that there can be a lot of guesswork about facial expressions and poses if you don't have that to look at. So you might have a sudden scene where there's an action shot, and I know I had this with my comic. You don't want to reference it last minute based off of reference sheets you look up online. I mean, you can, but you know, it just makes your life a little more difficult. Okay, so my quick tips for comicking and using reference sheets would be, if you are working on this as a personal project, then I highly recommend drawing as many reference sheets as you need to feel comfortable with each character, each setting, and each set of items or devices or tools or things like that the character is going to use. Just keep drawing them and redrawing them. This is like if you have this project and it's just personal and you have no deadline, you're just working on it as you go and all that. Now, on the flip side, if you have a deadline for your comic that you'd like to get out, then I don't think there's any harm in copying and pasting from your reference sheet. Say like you sketched up a really good smile or a really good frown, and you're having a bad day and you're trying to get through this thumbnailing of your comic and you just can't get that frown right, but you did draw it right once before on your reference sheet. Just copy and paste it. This is a time saver, and honestly, comics are a little bit different than other art mediums because the art is just there to facilitate the story, and it doesn't have to be 100% drawn each time by hand. You know, it's not a competition. No one's looking to make sure you didn't copy and paste a panel into the next panel, because every major comic producer, every company, every webcomicer has done that at least once or twice, where they had already drawn a scenic shot and then they'll just copy paste pieces of that because they have it in high enough resolution where they can do that. And there's not anything wrong with that, in my opinion. Especially if you're working on a tight deadline, it's kind of unrealistic to expect you to draw a character consistently, panel to panel, and accurately, exactly like you did before. And still meet your deadlines. And if you feel really bad about it, or you just feel like you want to improve upon that, then next time you have free time, just sit there and look at your reference sheet and try to draw it just by looking at it, you know, as opposed to doing the copy paste. But don't feel bad about it if you do, okay? So those are my tips for reference sheets, and if you want to know more about it, or if you want to see my reference sheets that I've got for ET Girl, I actually have those in the volume 1 for ET Girl, which currently is released on Kindle, and I'm still working on getting it out, the print version, the actual paperback book. But yes, and in that book you will be able to see reference sheets. But another place, if you want to be able to see it fast, is you can go to my Patreon. I have some really low paying tiers in there. I've got like as low as $1. And for the lowest few tiers, you can get access to my DeviantArt stash, which will link you to all of this bonus art, so you can see some examples of how I do reference sheets and things like that for my comic if you really want. And yeah, you can check it out there. I will have all the links down in the description below, and leave me your questions about reference sheets. If there's anything else on this topic you'd like me to answer, let me know, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you guys next week.